So on one of my most recent videos, I got a comment asking how long you would last, historically speaking, with various withdrawal rates, such as the 5%, 6%, and 7% safe withdrawal rates, as opposed to using the usual 3 or 4% withdrawal rates that I talk about in my videos. Because while I'm sure that some of you are hoping to, or already have, retired early, not everyone is going to go down that route. So if you have a more normal retirement, say 20 to 30 years, would you actually be able to withdraw more than 4% safely in retirement? And since the market has, since the turn of the millennium, been doing worse than it ever has been before, at least from a price appreciation standpoint, is the 4% rule still safe? Those are some of the questions we're going to be hopefully answering today, because in today's video, we're going to be talking about safe withdrawal rates and figuring out how safe they actually are. Hey everyone, Daniel here, and welcome to Next Level Life, a channel where you can learn all about investing, debt, retirement, and many other financial topics besides, because let's face it, the schools aren't going to teach it for us. So if any of those topics sound interesting to you, or if you want to learn how to better handle your money and have more financial freedom, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to my name to be notified every time I upload a new video. And if you want to further support the growth of this channel, you can smash that like button if you haven't already, share this video with a friend, and leave a comment below letting me know what topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. So there are a couple of things I do want to point out before we get started proper. The first is that past results do not indicate future returns, but until we see what those future returns are, the past results are the best and really only thing that we have to go off of, so that's what we'll be using today. The second thing is that expense ratios and taxes are going to vary, possibly quite wildly, depending on what your money is invested in, where your money is invested, and how you're pulling it out in retirement. And if you want to learn how to better manage your money in your post-working life, you can check out my financial independence and retirement playlist, or my investing playlist, where I've already had videos discussing those topics and will continue to have many more as time goes along. But because of how many variables there are with that, those factors have not been explicitly taken into account here. A third thing that I want to mention is that in the interest of keeping this video somewhat short and sweet, I will not be taking into account things like bonds or other investment options that you may have, nor any other forms of income such as Social Security, side hustles, and interest on other savings outside of your retirement savings, at least in the initial examples. The bright side is that if you do have these things, they're likely to increase your chances of success in comparison to what you see here in this video. And the last thing I want to mention is the assumptions that are being used here. For example, dividends are being paid and reinvested annually at the end of each year, and they average 1.7% for the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average scenarios. I used 1.7 because it's roughly in the middle of what dividends for index funds on these indices have been historically. Dividends for the NASDAQ scenarios will be 0.9%, since that is again roughly average for the indexes tracking the NASDAQ composite. The annual expenses in retirement for these scenarios are $36,000 and will be increased 2% each year for inflation. I use 2% each year for inflation because we don't know what the future inflation is actually going to be, and this is the alternative that the 4% rule allows if you're not able to adjust each year for the actual inflation. And the entire net worth of the recently retired individual will be dumped into an index fund on the day they retire in each of these scenarios. This was mainly done because I can only get data from so far back, at least reliable data from so far back. It's almost impossible to figure out what someone's net worth would be in some of these very old scenarios, assuming they invested consistently for their entire careers. I mean, we're going back all the way to like 1928 in this video, so say you had a 40-year working career and retired in January of 1928, well then you started working in the 1800s, and it's really hard to get reliable data from that far back. So just know that this is not going to be, by any means, a perfect case study. It's merely meant to be an exercise in seeing, historically, to the best of our ability, what may have happened had someone followed each of these safe withdrawal rates. The idea is just to give us a general feel for what might happen in the future using these rates, and whether or not we're comfortable using these rates given the past results. But with those caveats out of the way, let's get started. So what I did was gather all the historical price data from the S&P 500, Dow Jones Industrial Average, and NASDAQ Composite, threw them into a spreadsheet, and figured out over various retirement time periods, in this case every single available 20, 30, 40, and 50-year retirement time periods, how often someone would have actually ran out of money had they had their money invested in those indexes. For both the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average, I started testing in January of 1928, like I said, using 3%, 4%, 5%, and 6% safe withdrawal rates, and here were the results. Using the 3% safe withdrawal rate, John still has money left over in 97% of the scenarios under a 20-year retirement. He still has money left over at the end of his retirement in 95% of the 30-year scenarios, 94% of the 40-year scenarios, and 92% of the 50-year scenarios using both the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones. Very little variance here. Using the 4% safe withdrawal rate, John was still pretty successful, though there was a little bit of a variance this time between the two indexes. For the S&P 500 under a 20-year retirement, John still had money remaining at the end of 95% of the cases. Under the 30, 40, and 50-year scenarios, he succeeded 93%, 91%, and 87% of the time, respectively. For the Dow Jones, he succeeded with money to spare in 95, 93, 89, and 82% of the scenarios, under the 20, 30, 40, and 50-year retirements. So admittedly not quite as good as the S&P, but he's still succeeding over 80% of the time, even in those 50-year retirement scenarios. Again, with absolutely no income or other savings to help safeguard his investments during down markets. However, once we get to the 5 and 6% safe withdrawal rates, we see the numbers get a little shakier. And instead of going through each of these individually, I'm just going to throw a chart up on the screen and you'll see for yourself. Judging by these numbers, a 3% or 4% safe withdrawal rate for pretty much any retirement that'll last under 40 years looks to be a reasonably safe bet, with all of the success rates for the S&P 500 being over 90% in both cases, and the Dow Jones having a lowest success rate of 89%, which occurred under a 40-year retirement using the 4% rule. However, once you start getting above those 4% safe withdrawal rates, the numbers do look a little more uncertain, with the Dow Jones dropping below 70% chances of success in a 40-year retirement using a 5% safe withdrawal rate, and then of course going all the way down to a 38% chance of success under a 50-year retirement with a 6% safe withdrawal rate. But one thing that I noticed, particularly with the 3% and 4% safe withdrawal rates, is that almost all of the failing scenarios came pretty much right at the beginning. When someone retired in the late 1920s, or in other words, when they threw all of their money into the stock market at pretty much its peak, right before the absolute, hands down, worst stock market crash we have ever seen, the Great Depression. So I wondered what would happen if we looked at it from a more recent point of view. Say that in the interests of comparing apples to apples with the NASDAQ, we started in February of 1971, which is when the NASDAQ, of course, began. Under that scenario, we can't actually do a 50-year retirement because the NASDAQ hasn't actually been around for 50 years. So instead of the 20, 30, 40, and 50-year time spans we were using before, we're going to have to sub in a 15-year time span along with the 20, 30, and 40-year retirements this time around. But using these new retirement lengths will allow us to see what happens if someone was investing their nest egg during the heights that preceded the dot-com crash. The results? The S&P 500 and Dow Jones posted perfect 100% success rates in all 4 retirement length scenarios for both the 3% and 4% safe withdrawal rates. The S&P 500 actually also posted perfect scores under the 5% safe withdrawal rate for all 4 time spans, with the Dow just barely missing out on perfection with the 40-year scenario using a 5% safe withdrawal rate, coming in with a success rate of just 97%. Under a 6-year safe withdrawal rate, the S&P 500 had success rates of 96%, 97%, 91%, and then 69% under the 15, 20, 30, and 40-year scenarios respectively. The Dow Jones posted similar success rates under those same rules, with scores of 100, 97, 85, and 65% respectively. The NASDAQ, on the other hand, posted success rates of 100% for all 4 time spans using a 3% safe withdrawal rate, and 100% for the 20, 30, and 40-year scenarios using a 4% safe withdrawal rate, but thanks to investing the entire retirement nest egg right before the huge price drop the NASDAQ experienced during the dot-com bubble, it only managed to succeed in 98% of all 15-year retirement scenarios. Using a 5% safe withdrawal rate, we again see a very similar thing play out, with the NASDAQ having a 97% success rate during all 15-year retirement time spans and being perfect in the 20, 30, and 40-year time spans. And last but certainly not least, under a 6% safe withdrawal rate, we again see the numbers start to drop off a little bit more, with success rates of 94, 98, 94 again, and 80% under the 15, 20, 30, and 40-year time spans. The reason the 20-year retirements were slightly more successful than the 15-year retirements in this case came down to when the money was invested, and when the dividends were paid out. In reality, of course, this likely wouldn't be the case, since most of us are going to be investing our money consistently over time while we're working and not investing it as a lump sum on the day we retire. So I'm going to chalk that quirk up to a weird case of the combination of the math, timing, and limitations of this exercise. But what this does suggest, to me at least, is that barring the absolute worst that we have ever seen in the stock market happening again somewhere down the line, we're probably going to be pretty darn safe using either the 3% or 4% safe withdrawal rates. At the very least, I think we would have a reasonable expectation that we won't outlive our money under the conditions put forth by those rules. The 5 and 6% safe withdrawal rates may work for some shorter retirements, but it is a little shakier, and I probably wouldn't recommend it if you can avoid it and instead use one of the more conservative rates. But as I said, this is not a perfect case study, and it doesn't necessarily go into all the things you could do to supplement your retirement in order to increase your odds of success. So while they weren't calculated into these figures, let's talk about the few things you could do in reality to increase your odds of not running out of money once you leave the workforce. The first thing that you could do in order to increase your chances of successfully making it through retirement without running out of money is to diversify your investments between stocks and bonds, in order to increase your passive income a little bit through bond coupons, and to help balance out some of the years where the stocks are performing really poorly by withdrawing more of your money from bond funds that are hopefully performing a little better at the time. For an example on how big of a difference this can make, let's look back at John's scenarios from before. Say if John, instead of investing all of his money into an S&P 500 index fund, he instead decided to split up his investments between his S&P 500 fund and a Vanguard bond index fund. Just for the sake of this video, let's go with their total bond market index fund so that we can be well diversified. Let's say that John puts 75% of his nest egg into his S&P 500 fund and the last 25% into his bond fund. If we run the experiment again, this time starting from January 1987, since that's when Vanguard's total bond fund was created, and we can't really go any further back than that, we see that John has money left over at the end of his retirement in 92% of all 15-year scenarios, 94% of all 20-year scenarios, and 100% of all 30-year scenarios using a 6% safe withdrawal rate, assuming he only invested in the S&P 500. However, if he does split his money between the stocks and bonds, like we were saying, he ends up having money left over at the end of his retirement in all of the 15 and 30-year scenarios and 99% of all 20-year scenarios using that same 6% withdrawal rate. He actually succeeds in all 15, 20, and 30-year scenarios with both strategies when using a 3, 4, or 5% safe withdrawal rate during this time span. So having that diversification can help. A second thing that you can do in order to increase your chances of successfully making it through retirement without running out of money is to create multiple streams of income. This could be through some sort of small freelancing gig that you have going on the side, or a business that you run part-time, or some other form of passive income. Whatever the case may be, having another source of income to draw from in times when investments aren't doing as well as you'd hoped can make a significant difference in your chances of financial success in retirement. Let's again go back to John's example from the beginning of the video. John has all of his investments in the S&P 500 index fund and is bringing home $500 a month from his side hustle. Going all the way back to January of 1928, we see that using a 3 and 4% safe withdrawal rate never leaves John with even a 10% chance of outliving his money under the 20, 30, 40, and 50-year retirement scenarios. On average, his side hustle income is improving his chances at success compared to not having a side hustle income by anywhere from 1 to 3%. But the real interesting point comes with the higher withdrawal rates. Previously, at a 5% safe withdrawal rate, John had success rates of 93, 87, 79, and 69% under these scenarios. However, with side hustle income taken into account, his chances under the same scenario balloon to 95, 92, 90, and 86%. And the difference becomes even starker when we look at the 6% safe withdrawal rate. Without a side hustle, John succeeds 85, 68, 50, and 43% of the time under 20, 30, 40, and 50-year retirement scenarios, but with the side hustle income, he succeeds 93, 84, 73, and 62% of the time under those same retirement scenarios. And that's quite a big difference if you ask me. A third thing that you can do in order to increase your chances of successfully making it through retirement without running out of money is to first try out semi-retirement. By this, I essentially mean to work part-time for a year or two as you transition into full retirement life. This may have a couple of additional benefits as well. First is that it allows you to maintain that camaraderie that you have with your coworkers. Social interaction is something that tends to be a little less frequent in retirement, at least when you first retire, if you're retiring early. And the second thing that it does is that it allows you to figure out what you want to be doing in retirement once you no longer have work to fill your days. This is definitely something that you need to think about and plan for. I can say from personal experience, it should not be underestimated. And of course, the third benefit that this may have is that it allows you to save a little bit more while simultaneously shortening the amount of time that your savings will have to last you in full retirement, which will obviously also increase your chances at success. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.